A mysterious night enveloped the city, bringing new adventures. Meanwhile, in one of the bars, fresh and hoppy beer was already waiting for its customers. In a noisy and cheerful company, one of the young men stood up and proclaimed that today he had been accepted into Afria Academy. Actively urging everyone to have a drink with him, then settling into his seat, he snagged the person sitting next to him. He in turn made a remark to him, to which the young man reacted very violently, saying that he did not know who he was talking to. One of his company asked him to calm down, but the guy wouldn't budge and banged his mug on the table. Then he sat back down and said that in honor of the big day, he forgave him. They began to discuss vigorously the story they had remembered at the table, about the squad of peerless heroes. The man sitting next to them perked up his ears. At the head of these heroes was the chosen one. His name was Kyle, as well as the divine bow Ramia and the holy maiden Sarah, but there was someone else there. Ash wizard Renel Van Trias, another stated that he was ballast and despite after becoming the head of the Tower of Magic. He wasn't memorable for the entire trek, and Kyle did all the work. Meanwhile, the day before, a squad of peerless heroes showed up, which the townsfolk recognized, and soon began shouting about, saying that they had come to help them deal with evil. Demons were everywhere. They were flying in the sky and crawling on the ground. At this time, the one Kyle was walking ahead of the squad. He walked over to one of the ruins, and leaning his foot on a stone, surveyed what the incorrigible evil had done. The chosen hero Kyle Torben was truly a brave and warlike man with the rest of the heroes behind him. Divine Bow Ramia stated that there were too many of them, and dealing with this army would not be easy. Holy Maiden Sarah replied that they have the main chosen hero Kyle, so let him do his duty. They watched the creatures spreading everywhere and realized they couldn't cope. They wanted to get the army out of the capital. Suddenly the Ash Wizard Renel Van Trias stood behind them, placing a hand on Kyle's shoulder assured them otherwise. He jumped into the very epicenter of the monsters and used his superpowers. Wizard Van Trias swept through the hurricane and landed right in front of them. Sarah and Remia didn't understand when he had time. Since he was behind everyone, Kyle decided to keep silent at this point. At this time, the Ash Wizard Renel Van Trias was applying magic shields and swooping down to meet the demons. He placed magic markers on the place where the monsters were pandemonium, thus completing the preparation of the ability, and hurriedly applied the next magic skill. He clearly understood what he had to do, after which his hands shimmered with lightning, thus bringing the magic blast into action. Which immediately happened. The soldiers were impressed with the work of a squad of incomparable heroes. At this time, the leader of the monsters wanted to confront the squad of heroes. Wizard Trias was the first to get into the fight here as well, using another magical ability. He literally restrained the monster with his magic. The next trick was a magical push. The rest of the squad's heroes watched on, the maiden Sarah noting that there was no point in retreating any longer. Bo Ramia said he was taking too many risks while using the most rudimentary of magical skills. Saying all this to Kyle, she expected him to agree with her, because in her opinion the wizard was being stupid. Meanwhile, Van Trias was still at it, and was preparing a new gift for the demons. This time, a magical chain performed by the same Ash Wizard awaited them, magical circles diverging on the ground, after which he threw the activated ability at the monster just as soon, thus paralyzing the demon leader. The lightning bolts enveloped him completely. After holding it in that position for a few seconds, he turned to the others and called out to Kyle, who at that very moment picked up his sword and rushed to deliver his most powerful blow to the monster. Having finally dealt with the demons, the next day, the squad of heroes received congratulations from the citizens of the city. All the people shouted out Kyle's name and sincerely thanked their magical protectors. Wizard Van Trias was behind the rest of the heroes, as if shunning the event. The festivities were in full swing and didn't end until the next day. Meanwhile, in the squad house of the peerless heroes, there were discussions about their next steps. The Ashy Wizard Trias asked the others where they would be going this time. He removed his hood from his head and watched intently the ambiguous reactions of the heroes. Suddenly, Kyle said that no one else was going anywhere with Trias. The wizard was surprised to hear that answer. Kyle said that they had originally teamed up to destroy the Demon King. He was finished, and peace had come to the kingdom. So mission accomplished. Still without turning around, he added that nothing else bound them. After that, they did turn around to him. The wizard standing in the middle of the room was discouraged. Kyle then announced the final verdict, the expulsion of Van Trias from the hero squad. On the day he was drinking at the bar, the young men still threw him out on the street. One of them assumed because of appearance that the mage who was supposedly supposed to be strong, but he didn't fight. Van Trias still couldn't understand why he had been excluded from the hero squad, saying it out loud. The boys asked him what he was talking about, but the wizard didn't notice them or the situation he was in and continued to think. After all, he did the bulk of the work, and believed that the squad had become so famous mostly because of him. The young men kept trying to figure out what he was muttering to himself, assuming it was just drunken ramblings. Van Trias got to his feet and shook himself off. He still hadn't found an answer to his main question, why he was banished from the squad. The teens continued to threaten him with a beating, The wizard walked in their direction and still had one thing on his mind. After all, he slayed everyone he could, and dragons and many other monsters he was also afraid, but he went forward. Especially when Kyle met with the Demon King, he just cowardly ran away. Therefore, the one who dealt critical damage to him was the Ash Wizard Van Trieste. At this moment, he literally ignited blue magic and was walking towards the juvenile bullies. He was convinced that everyone should have shouted his name then, that he was the one who should have gotten the applause. But he was simply no longer needed. One of the smaller intruders began to realize who stood before them, but could not utter a word. The Ashy Wizard said he would teach them intelligence and hastily applied the abilities. Meanwhile, an apricot flew into Renelle's head. She cried out in pain. Rubbing her head, she said she hadn't expected such a reaction to her curses. The teacher, stroking his gray beard, replied that he had not expected such a change from his student. He looked at her intently and addressed her by the name Renelle. In response, she withdrew a surprised look at her teacher. He warned her that when she crossed that gate, her name would be Rania Van Trieste, and that from this day and from this minute, Rania would become the teacher of Afria Academy. The teacher asked again if this was how he really wanted to live his second life. He replied that it had been 5 years since the victory over the Demon King. Since then, peace had reigned in the land. And from now on, he will never be a hero again, as he has come to terms with it. He said he just didn't need to stay that way anymore, and he'd made up his mind. And he will be a regular teacher in Afria's Magic Academy, accordingly starting a new life with a clean slate. An unusually beautiful sunset was visible in the sky, and birds soared carefree over the forest. Suddenly in the woods, the guy was attacked by demonic dogs. He fell to the ground and tried to chase them away from him. They slowly approached him. They had horns along their skulls. Their pupilless white eyes terrified the young man. One of the dogs growled. It opened its jaws wide to reveal sharp oblong fangs. The sound of the growl was piercing. The young man was frightened and thought it was the end. He closed his eyes and covered himself with his hand. At that moment, blood splattered on the ground. Hearing the characteristic sound, he fearfully opened his eyes and saw before him a horrifying picture. The mage killed one of the demons using his magic. The pack of the others hesitated to further attack him and retreated back. That mage was the former Ash Mage from the Hero Squad, Renelle Van Trieste. The demonic beasts were moving further and further away from the guy. The young man once again used his magical powers to overcome the animals. He directed his magic power at the demon dogs. They were knocked down and flew away from the man. Renelle Van Trieste had defeated a demon king in the past. Blood rushed to the ground. The demonic hounds all kept flying because of the guy's strength. One of them still stopped and stood with its paws on the ground. Renelle had gained incredible strength. He stood in the center of the fight, magical energy surrounding him. The guy directed his power at the demonic dog again. It screamed in agony. Renelle's strength was so great that he was able to knock the demonic beast down a second time. Renelle spread his arms and shoved all the demon dogs in the neighborhood away. They were no longer alive. Each power had its own price. A loud explosion was heard in the forest at the sight of Renelle's battle with the demon dogs. Renelle looked victoriously into the distance. However, something was approaching behind his back. Since the guy had killed the Demon King, but his body was still sealed. From behind Renelle's back, a demon dog was coming up. It opened its mouth, hoping to eat the boy. He was already approaching the young man. The demon dog opened its mouth even more, and was about to tear the mage's neck. This seal on Renelle's body allowed the demons to find him wherever he was, as they desire vengeance for his master. The demon dog that had attacked Renelle was extremely surprised to see him using his magic. He created a magic circle. After learning about everything, the guy realized that if he continued to be an antichrist, he would die sooner or later. The magician channeled his power into the demon dog. The animal flew away due to Renelle's strength. The rescued man sat on the ground in bewilderment. He didn't understand what this power was. Turns out this mage was a girl. She took off her hood and asked with a cold expression how the man was feeling. The man was fine. He thanked the girl for saving him from those demons. She politely gave the man her hand. The man wanted to know the name of his savior. The girl had already started to answer, but stammered. She said it didn't matter. The girl pointed out the way the man could safely return to the city where he could get help. The girl almost blurted out her real name. Renelle Van Trieste no longer existed. The girl pulled her hood over her face thoughtfully and started on her way. The girl traveled for quite a while, evening followed by a long, dark night. However, it was finally a clear morning. A large house could be seen in the distance, with the bright sun illuminating everything. The girl was walking down the ramp to the house. She hadn't been there for a long time. A memory came to her. The former Ash Mage from the Hero Squad had retired. Renelle's teacher stared at him, wanting to ask him something. Looks like the guy was really going to kill the Demon King. He was already in the doorway and about to set off. His teacher opened the door and asked if the boy was sure he wanted to go on this hike, since the odds were high that he would die. The guy's magic wasn't perfect, and he hadn't fully completed his training, so he might get himself into danger. Renel listened to everything carefully. Renel bowed and apologized to the teacher, thanking him for everything. The teacher looked at the boy in surprise. The teacher looked sadly at Renel, the old man gritting his teeth at having a restless student. Renel went on his way. At last his teacher told him to bring the head of the Demon King, and only then would he recognize him as his disciple. 5 years passed, and Renel, already in the guise of a girl, came to his teacher's house again. He looked at the place he had promised to return to. Renel walked up to the door of his teacher's house. He still hadn't brought the Demon King's head. Renel knocked on his teacher's door, hoping he was home at that moment. The teacher opened the door and wondered who had been brought there. Renel greeted his teacher cheerfully and took off his hood. In front of the teacher was a cute young girl. It was actually this old man's disciple who had returned after 5 years. The teacher felt as if he had been electrocuted at that moment. He was very surprised to see this mysterious girl. The Ash Mage thought that the teacher immediately realized who the girl was, and he even understood why she had come. The teacher thought his student had died in battle. He began to grieve and regretted not using force to stop him. The girl was confused. The teacher thought that the girl had come to bring his last will. He wept with grief, not believing that all that was left of his student was the staff he had given her. The teacher was reluctant to let the student go at first, but was proud that he had chosen the path himself. The teacher had heard of all his exploits, and believed that his contribution to the defense of humanity would never be forgotten. The girl tried to explain everything to the teacher, but he didn't even listen to her. She didn't know what to do. She started explaining everything to her teacher. The girl said she was his student, Renel. The teacher did not believe her. He knew perfectly well that it was not the same person. At that moment, the staff in the girl's hands glowed with a blue light. The light from the staff sanctified everything around. The teacher was very surprised to see it. He knew immediately that it was definitely the color of Renel's mana. The man's eyes brightened. He interrogated if the girl was actually Ranel. The teacher trembled with shock. The girl smiled and replied that she was in fact his apprentice, and she returned. The girl didn't have time to speak before a thunderous flash came from near her. It was like a bolt of lightning. The girl managed to dodge. She was shocked by this turn of events. The thunderous flash shattered the tree behind the girl. The teacher turned around. He was the one who sent a thunderous flash. The man was clearly unhappy with the situation. The teacher told Renel to follow him. The flash made her hair must, and she recognized her mentor's temperament. Many high-ranking people began writing to the teacher after Renel went missing. Many letters were sent to Roselle, the elder of the Mage Tower. The letters were also addressed to the professor of higher magic at Afria Academy. All these people were concerned about the missing guy. They approached the mentor of the Ash Mage. All these people wanted to know where his apprentice was, for no one had heard from Renel for over 5 years, and everyone was concerned about his disappearance. The teacher yelled furiously at Renel, explaining how many letters he'd gotten since the day he'd gone missing, asking him to find the guy. Roselle had kept all these letters. They were lying on his desk. He brought the girl to look at them. The man was furious that his apprentice was about to resign without saying anything to anyone. The teacher was even willing to get rid of these letters because he was sure his student was dead. Roselle smiled and handed Renel all those letters since she was alive. A blue light appeared behind the man's back. It was a new letter from the rector of Afria Academy, Aaron Van Tarrant. A letter from such a high-ranking person was something serious. Aaron was writing to his dear friend. He told him that spring was about to arrive, which meant new mages would be arriving at the academy. The man hoped that Roselle was ready to teach the new students. But the man also had a personal question he wanted to ask in this letter. Aaron wondered if his friend knew where Renel was missing right now. He wanted to find out, as the new gifters need to know the hero that saved their world from evil. Better yet, the newcomers would learn a lot of useful things from his mouth. In the letter, the man asked him to let him know if Roselle knew where he was. Renel decided to burn all the letters. His teacher asked if he was sure. At that moment, Renel had already created a flame in his hand with magic. The girl did not want to deal with all these letters. She was not interested in them. The teacher thought that she should show respect to those who wrote these letters. It was getting evening outside. A sunset of incredible beauty could be seen above the teacher's house. The teacher looked intently at his student and was going to find out everything from her. Roselle asked what happened to Renel's real body. The girl looked at the man in surprise. The girl smiled awkwardly. She didn't know if she should tell him the story. Renel got kicked out of the squad and went to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Some assholes tried to run him down, but then some demonic creature appeared, surrounded by mysterious energy. It attacked the boy, struck him, and blood spurted from Renel's mouth to the ground. The creature continued to attack, using its magic. Renel decided to fight back, jumped to the ground and began to conjure. The guy himself didn't fully understand what had happened to him, and how he found himself in the girl's body. The story was more like a fiction. The teacher turned away and thought that the boy had definitely had a reason to change his appearance like that. The girl was surprised that the teacher had stopped questioning her so easily. Roselle wondered what the girl was going to do now. She answered that she could no longer be an adventurer now. Renel came to seek advice from his teacher. The girl was holding a letter with a red seal. The letter was from the rector of Afria Academy, Aaron Van Tarrant. Magic numbers hovered around it. The teacher pondered, and scratching his gray beard, he had an ingenious thought. He suggested that Renel visit Afria's academy. The girl looked at the teacher with surprise. The man thought that in this way he could fulfill his old friend's request for the return of the Ash Mage. Afria Academy was a grand place with huge, beautiful buildings, a fountain in front of them, and benches all around. The girl looked determinedly at the teacher. She thought it was a good option for her next steps. The next day, Afria's Academy was glistening, reflecting the sunlight. They were discussing the arrival of a new magic teacher. Aaron Van Tyranta, the rector of the Royal Afria Magical Academy, was very happy to have a new colleague, and even on the recommendation of his friend. Roselle was sitting in Aaron's office. He had recommended his friend a rather capable mage, who would be able to teach his new students a lot. The old man thought his friend would be pleased when he saw the new teacher in action. Aaron was sure it was about the Ash Mage. The headmaster was very intrigued. Aaron was ready to make a contract with him at once. He opened a desk drawer. Roselle corrected him by saying that the teacher would be a girl. She would be his lovely daughter. The old man smiled and told Aaron to be confident in her abilities. The girl could definitely handle the new job. The headmaster was surprised that his friend wasn't referring to the Ash Mage. Roselle was puzzled as to why his friend thought that. Roselle introduced the girl. Her name was Rania Van Trias. She was incredibly talented and virtuoso in magic. The old man continued to speak flatteringly of the girl. Aaron was furious. He gritted his teeth angrily. The principal jumped up from behind his desk and stated that the rules were the same for everyone, and the staff was not allowed to recommend their children or other relatives for employment, so would not be able to take her on as a teacher. Roselle made a serious expression on his face. He wasn't happy that the principal was being stubborn. After all, he had been saying for years to find help for his department because of the sheer volume of work. Here, Roselle had found another terrific teacher. The headmaster jumped up from the table. He explained that this year was especially important for all of them, as they were now receiving incredible talent that they hadn't had in 10 years. Aaron threw the student applications at his friend and demanded to see them. He was unhappy that Roselle was going to engage in nepotism and asked to hire his daughter. Roselle looked at the applications of the new students with interest. He noticed that there were a lot of capable mages among them. Roselle was sure that only his little girl could handle them all. The director was angry that his friend didn't listen to him at all. Rania arrived at the academy one day. She walked into the library of the Royal Magical Academy. In it, students were studying at tables. It had been 6 years since her last visit to the academy, but nothing much had changed there. The girl walked with interest through the library of the academy she herself had attended. Rania remembered her teacher's words that she should add to her knowledge of magic, for now she would be teaching it to others. The girl thought that the old man did not know her at all, because she had long ago read all the books from this library and she would not get new knowledge here. Rania herself did not understand why she listened to the teacher and went to the library. In front of her, she saw a student in an academy cloak. The girl heard the indignant words of the students come out. They were having trouble learning. The guy sitting at the first table exclaimed that his mana was not coming out. He was desperate. His pen, for some reason, was no longer making symbols with mana. A magic circle was drawn on the boy's sheet, but it wasn't complete. The librarian admonished the boys to keep quiet. The boy wanted his friends to help him with the mana, but they couldn't do it either. One of the guys fixed his glasses and thought that his mana was only in the library and that there was probably a connection. The others thought that only a freshman would think that. Rania heard the guy's dialogue. She realized that they couldn't let mana out as it was worth putting a little more concentration into it. A man in an academy robe was coming straight at her. The man in the robe bumped into the girl with his shoulder. It was the 4th Princess Lady Ayla, who spends forever in the library. The girl was knocked down by Rania. She dropped all her study materials. The girl started picking up all the scattered papers. Rania picked up one of them with a picture of some kind of magic circle. Rania looked at the paper in surprise. Ayla was called a child blessed by the stars, considered gifted. She entered their academy this year. There were high expectations for the girl. The headmaster believed that she should learn from the best. Roselle had also heard about her, because even royalty had to be trained because of the martial law. Roselle took Ayla's resume and looked at it closely. The girl's picture was pasted on it. The remnants of the Demon King's army continued to rampage through their lands, and the hero squad could no longer fight them because the leader had excluded the Ash Mage from the hero squad. The principal told his friend that his student was the reason this girl came to their academy. They knew each other. The headmaster, hinting at the return of the Ash Mage, said that Ayla was hoping to meet him as an apprentice. Roselle pretended not to hear his friend. The headmaster was outraged that his friend had brought his daughter instead of him. Rania was sure that the girl she had encountered was the fourth princess of the kingdom, Lady Ayla. 6 years ago, she had come to her library every day and asked her to tell her about magical matter. Rania was still in her past body then. Rania noticed that Ayla had changed and grown up a lot since then, and now looked like a grown-up girl. Ayla didn't understand why Rania was staring at her. She asked if she was a mage. Rania tried to lighten the atmosphere and said that everyone in the academy was a mage. The girl disagreed with her, for the number of incompetent mages was growing every day. Many people don't know the basics of magical chain transformation, but boast that they know a lot of spells. But they are no match for an ash mage. Many such wizards died on the front lines because they couldn't even properly build magical chains and cast the right spell. The girl hoped that Rania would agree with her point of view. Rania said she was right, and handed her the scattered papers. Ayla apologized for getting carried away with the conversation, and thanked the girl for helping her gather her notes. Ayla was about to leave, but Rania noticed that she had dropped another sheet of paper. She stopped the girl. The girl looked at the sheet. It had that very diagram of the mysterious magic circle on it. That magic circle was a barrier. The girl wanted to take the leaf from Rania's hands. On the sheet was a picture of a rare Sukabara barrier. Rania was in no hurry to give this diagram back to Ayla. Rania noticed that these were undead developments. The circuit was a very interesting specimen. Ayla was shocked that the girl knew this, after all. This circuit was a trophy of the hero squad. No mage has ever been able to decipher this scheme to use it in battle. Rania said that it wasn't that hard to understand. Ayla had been trying to decipher it for months. She doubted the girl knew the solution. Rania thought that one just had to scrutinize the writing around the circle. The girl asked Ayla if she had tried this method, for it was not so difficult. The girl's face was blank with surprise. Ayla was furious at the girl's overconfidence. She demanded to activate this spell here and now. She considered the girl's words as insults towards a member of the royal family. Rania agreed to do what the girl demanded. She set about trying to use her mana. The girl showed the first gestures from the spell. The girl then proceeded to show a second gesture, but her mana wouldn't come out. Ayla explained that she wouldn't work while the girl was here because of her star blessing. The girl was literally pulling mana from everyone around her. Rania realized what she had to do to activate the barrier. She made a hand gesture and started using Manu. Magical symbols and circles appeared around her. The girl stepped on the floor. A magic circle appeared under her foot. The entire library was filled with Rania's mana. The disciples were shocked because of the girl's unusually strong mana. They hadn't seen something like this before. The guys didn't realize where such a strong energy was coming from. It filled the entire library room. They realized that this was definitely not the princess mana. Magic symbols were appearing all around. Rania was serious about proving her point to the girl. She continued to use her strength and build a protective barrier. Ayla was sure it could not be done. The girl looked at Rani's actions with surprise. The girl conjured up the Sukabar barrier in a flash. She knew exactly how to clearly explain to the students what their mistake was in deciphering. At this time, Rania's mana power was tearing down everything around her. The students could barely sit at their desks. Rania was going to show the girl how she was able to conjure a protective barrier. Because of their magic, everything around them was glowing with a bright light. It was visible even coming out of the academy. Rania was sitting at the table with Roselle. She had not received the employment contract. The old man thought that Aaron would give up sooner or later and hire the girl. Roselle coughed and said that the principal was always overly serious when it came to the academy. All they had to do was to wait for the principal's verdict. Rania apologized to the teacher because he had to endure a lot for her. Roselle reassured the girl, saying that they would just have to think of another way to get her a job. At that time, 2 men in uniform were heading toward the old man's house. They knocked on the door of Roselle's house. They were looking for the professor. Rania was surprised at their unexpected visit. The teacher opened the door for them. The princess's guards came to his house. The men apologized for the sudden visit. They needed to deliver a message to Rania from the princess. The professor said it was his daughter. One of Ayla's guards presented the girl with a gift. It was an academy uniform, beautifully packaged in a gift box. Also offered with the gift was a letter from the 4th princess. Rania was surprised at this sudden gift. Ayla wished to learn magic from the girl. The letter said that from that day on, Rania would officially become a teacher at the Academy of Magical Arts of Afia. Meanwhile, at Ayla's castle, the girl was informed that the decipherment of the defense spell had been sent to the front lines. The girl thanked Sir Havel. Sir Gavel noticed that he was worried about something after all. The princess looked worriedly at her guard. It bothered the guy that Rania had deciphered the undead spell with such ease. They had investigated among the soldiers, but no one had heard of her before. Guy wondered how a woman who had never been to a battlefield could decipher this diagram in a few minutes. Ayla said it was truly amazing. It is because of Rania's extraordinary abilities that she wants to be trained by the girl. Gavel remarked that she had yet to be interviewed by the professors of the magic department. The princess agreed with him. The boy wondered if the girl could do it. The princess was sure that Rania would succeed and become her teacher. The girl looked out the window of her castle with a smile. She had big plans for Rania. At this time in Roselle's house, Rania was preparing for an interview. The girl declared that she did not want to wear the robe given to her. Roselle was angered by the girl's attitude after all. The princess had specifically bought this costume for her. He told her to change her clothes immediately. There will be mages from the tower at the interview because Aaron didn't agree with the princess's opinion on hiring Rania. Besides her, many talents have enrolled this year, and the principal wants only the best professors to teach them. The old man remarked that since the princess herself saw potential in the girl, you can't embarrass her and Rania needs to look dignified. The girl still agreed to wear the suit given to her. She took a look at herself in the mirror. Rania looked like a real academy teacher. The girl had met the princess 6 years ago in the library, and now she was giving her these things. The girl thought it was strange. The thought flashed through Rania's mind that perhaps the girl was guessing at something. However, she quickly abandoned them and felt that she was overthinking things. Rania had to hurry up so that she would not be late for her interview. The weather was beautiful and the cherry blossoms were blooming. Rania and Roselle were on their way to the academy. Ayla was already waiting for them inside. Some of the professors jokingly asked what Belaruchka was. Someone was sitting on an honorary chair and tapping nervously on it. Dark Arts Professor Edward couldn't believe that this man was nervous before meeting the daughter of the Ash Tower Elder. There was a girl sitting next to him who looked very anxious, her elbows resting on the table. The girl had it all written all over her face. Edward was teasing her. The girl was a light magic professor, Sally Dobera. The girl wasn't nervous, she was annoyed, and saw no point in wasting time on a mage no one knew anything about. They almost got into a scuffle, and started teasing each other about the girl drinking the elixir of longevity. The two of them hadn't been at each other's throats since they'd been at the academy. A member of the academy staff coughed and announced the arrival of Roselle Van Trias. He also said that his daughter, Afria Academy teacher candidate Rania Van Trias, had arrived with him. All the professors turned towards the door in surprise. They wanted to look at the teacher candidate. The Ash Tower Elder hadn't trained anyone for a long time. The last student he had was an Ash Mage from the Hero Squad. The two walked into the academy hall. The professors didn't understand who this girl was, since her merit was recognized by Professor Roselle himself. Princess Ayla looked with a smile at Rania, who had entered the room. She was waiting for the girl to arrive. The princess stood up from the table to get a better look at the girl. Rania walked out into the hall in full parade. She was dressed in a gorgeous robe given by Princess Ayla. All the professors of the academy looked at the girl in surprise. They were already negative towards her from the beginning. They didn't understand who she was and how she was able to control Manu despite being near the princess. The professors had heard nothing about this girl. The students informed them that Rania was able to release Manu by ignoring Princess Ayla's blessing, but the professors thought they were exaggerating too much. Rania was uncomfortable with the stares of the teachers. She sat down awkwardly at the table next to Roselle and heard all the professors' remarks. Selly suggested that we start the interview since everyone was in place. The princess agreed with the girl. Selly introduced Rania as a young sorceress and teacher candidate. The girl said they needed no introduction. Rania disagreed with them. She had no idea who they were. Selly got up from the table and said that today she and the professors would be proving that the girl was rather incompetent and unfit to be a teacher. The only thing the girl had was a recommendation from the Elder of Rosel's magic tower, and up to this point, nothing was known about her. No combat merits or discoveries. Selly was sure that Rania had no idea how to teach magic to others. The girl listened awkwardly to everything as the professor walked unceremoniously over her. Selly jumped up from the table and slammed her hand down on it. She was going to make more arguments to prove her point. A prince from a northern country arrived at the academy. He was a very rugged young man. He is the head of the Grace family and the future king of the north and just an extraordinarily talented young man. Therefore, Sally felt that Rania was not capable of training such a talented talent. Rania asked Roselle who the lady was. He explained everything to the girl. Edward agreed with Sally. She was surprised that he was supporting her for once, despite their constant disagreements and quarrels. The professors felt that Rania simply didn't have the experience to work with such capable students. The professors started talking about the strongest wizard among the first years, nicknamed Bernua. The guy could single-handedly take down a lot of opponents with his sword. Edward began to praise the young man. He said that Bernua was an incredibly strong boy. He had taken down every gang in the city. Rania asked who the professors were talking about. It was a slum boy with rare magic who had been trained by Blackbeard. Sally and Edward started arguing again about who was the strongest of the first years. They were both promoting their candidates. One of the teachers asked them to calm down. Roselle looked seriously at the way his colleagues were arguing. He was displeased with their words. Roselle wanted to make the same point and explain why he thought Rania was a good candidate for the position. The old man understood all the professors. They were worried about the future of the academy's students, which directly depended on their teachers. Roselle didn't think it was up to them to evaluate Rania's skills. He thought it was up to the students to decide if they wanted to learn from her. The professors thought about Roselle's suggestion. The girl smiled, hearing her teacher's words. She was pleased with his suggestion. Roselle wanted to compromise with the professors on Rania's employment. It was the day of the classification test for first-year students. Rania didn't know anything about it. Roselle put a condition that if the girl passed this test successfully, they would take her as a teacher at the academy. Rania looked at her teacher in surprise. She didn't realize he had such a plan. Rania was upset that the professor had not told her anything about the plan, for she did not even know the essence of the test. The heroes arrived at the Harme Forest. The professors began to explain how the classification test would be administered. The first-year students crowded around them. The guys didn't understand why they needed another test, since they had already taken the entrance exams. The students were outraged by this, because they had enough classes and no time for weird tests. The students did not understand why this test was being administered specifically at Harme Forest. One of the teachers asked everyone present to calm down, or they would not hear all the terms of the test. Rania was bored to be on this test. She yawned sweetly. At that moment, the pupils saw someone approaching them. They immediately realized who it was. To them proudly walked the best of the best among the first-timers. Among them was the princess of their country, Ayla. There were only 4 of the strongest. Princess Ayla went first, followed by 2 other guys and 1 girl. They got in on the recommendation of professors from the Magic Tower. They are called the new heroes of humanity. Rania wasn't feeling well. She didn't particularly like the idea of doing this test. The girl didn't understand who came up with the idea of having lessons first thing in the morning, because she wanted to sleep. One of the teachers picked up the sheet with the test conditions and was ready to start explaining them. There was a wooden plaque with hieroglyphics hanging from a tree. The man announced that their classification test began from that moment. Everyone listened attentively to the professor. Rania was bored. She scratched her head and thought she wanted a cup of coffee. Familiarization with the content of the distribution test for undergraduate students began. But before that, there was the announcement of faculty changes. It was read by Caesar, Associate Professor of Elementary Magic. He introduced the new assistant professor, Rania Van Triest, to the students. The girl said hello. She was glad to meet the guys. The students began to discuss the new instructor. Now Caesar began to tell them how the placement test would take place. The test will take place in the Hermine Forest. For testing, students would be divided into 4 regions: North, South, West, and East. In the center was the mana source. In the center of each region is a magic stone. Students will receive points for the amount of time they touch the magic stone in their region. Defense and offense were allowed to a certain extent. However, if observers feel that students have gone too far, they have the right to intervene. The most important rule was not to go near the mana source in the forest under any circumstances. All the students had to know why. Rania didn't know what Caesar was talking about. The girl wondered why they would even do a test in a problematic place. Caesar's face changed in an instant. He angrily adjusted his glasses. The docent remembered something. They have not yet decided in which region Associate Professor Rania will be the observer. Since the girl arrived a little later than the others, Caesar would leave her the edge. The man snapped his fingers. A map of the forest appeared in the air. Raya, I was supposed to be an observer in the northern region. Caesar smiled slyly. He said there should be no problem, and he believed the girl would do well. All the students' faces changed. They looked fearfully at Caesar. Apparently, this region was dangerous. The explanation of the rules was over, and now the placement test for the senior students had begun. All the students started to go to their regions. They said goodbye to each other, and said they would meet after the test was over. The boys gathered in groups and were teleported with magic circles to their sectors. The girl kept pondering over the region she was to go to. At that moment, she was suddenly called. Caesar called out to her. Rania noticed that he continued to smirk. The girl suspected something. She walked over to Caesar. He was going to tell her something about the northern region, so she would know what she might encounter. The man smirked slyly and said this place was special, just like the girl. It will contain Belnoa from the Tower of Black Magic and Lark Van from the Tower of White Magic. Caesar explained that the 2 students were sent to the northern region. He asked Rania if she could handle it. Caesar scoffed at the girl, for a conflict of interest was brewing between the masters of the Magic Towers, and if one of the representatives was injured, the followers would not be silent. Turns out Caesar had a personal interest, because he had been waiting for years to become Professor Roselle's assistant, and couldn't let the girl steal the spot. These 2 students are fine talents, so Rania will have to take good care of them. Caesar laughed and thought that this would be the end of the rule of nepotism. The girl felt that the man was looking down on her. She decided to go to the northern region. It bothered Rania that there were a lot of crazy people in the academy. She walked towards the teleportation portal. At this time, the Tower Master was informed that testing had already begun. Edward sat thoughtfully in his office, looking at some papers on his desk. Rania's resume lay in front of the man. The man looked it over carefully. He tapped the desk nervously. Edward was about to wait patiently for the test results, but he was distracted by something strange. Rania van Trias became Belnoa's observer at the classification test. Edward was probably the only one who noticed this peculiarity, for the Tower of Black Magic was conducting a stock check on those who accumulate the spell in their bodies. However, even the man couldn't tell how many spells she held within her, or what circle she belonged to. Even Edward, the master of the magic tower, could not read the girl. He was very surprised at that. Edward was going to leave those thoughts for now and enjoy the placement test. He felt that whatever happened should not affect the results of the exam. Edward was very supportive of his candidate and believed that white student could never beat Belnoa. Edward was sure that the White Tower Master had a silly expression on his face right now, for his candidate would definitely lose. At this time in the Hermain Forest in its northern region, mana was flying everywhere and something dangerous was brewing. Someone stepped on the ground and started using dark red-colored magic. It was Belnoa. He was using the shadow-weaving technique. Belnoa's mana spread out in all directions from the young man. Someone's silhouette could be seen in the forest in the distance. He was walking down the ramp toward the young man. It was Lark Van Grace from the White Magic Tower. He looked at his opponent tensely. Belnoa recognized the lad and thought he was the young man the Black Old Man had spoken of. In the past, Edward had told the boy to show that he was better than a student of the White Tower. Belnoa was filled with anger and decided to do the old man's bidding. The boy glared angrily at his opponent. Dark magic was hovering around him. Lark Van Grace noticed the guy. He turned around sharply. Lark took a fighting stance and told Belnoa not to hide and to come out, for true warriors do not hide. Belnoa started running at his opponent with all his might and attacked him, his black magic coming along with him. Belnoa began to attack Lark. He abruptly launched a beam of black magic at him. Lark decided to attack back. He launched his magic axes filled with his mana at Belnoa. The axe filled with white energy easily chopped Belnoa's stream of dark magic in half. The boy was confused at such a strength of his opponent. Belnoa decided to act. He directed another stream of black magic directly at the axe with anger. The boy was making a great effort to stand up to Lark with dignity. Resisting the attacks of the White Tower candidate was harder than Belnoa thought. He was thrown back by the guy's strength. In a second, Lark was no longer visible, Belnoa thought as he disappeared. At that moment, Belnoa noticed something above him. The young man became very tense. Above him was Lark. Belnoa thought he really did look like a battle mage. Lark had superior speed and good mass for a fight. The boy swung his axe and began to fall on Belnoa. He struck his opponent with all his might with his axe. Belnoa managed to defend himself with a shield of dark magic. Belnoa's strength threw the guy off. The guy was flustered at not being able to overpower his opponent. Belnoa thought that story about the troll being torn to pieces wasn't just a rumor. The boy thought it would be difficult for him to defeat Lark in a one-on-one fight. His opponent was preparing to attack again. The guy was determined and thought he hadn't lost yet. He was going to use a new technique. The young man's hand was wrapped in a bandage. Belnoa moved his finger. Blood gushed from it. He was using an offering technique. A circle of dark magic had formed around him and was rising towards the sky. The guy was about to attack. Rania watched the battle of these students. The girl thought these boys were pretty good. Rania was sitting in a tree. She thought it was wonderful that the boys were so energetic, fighting each other so vigorously. The Tower Masters boasted in such a way that the girl couldn't tell if they were telling the truth, but the guys really turned out to be good at it themselves. Lark looked like he could be sent to the battlefield right now, and it was no wonder he had become the #1 apprentice of the White Tower Master. However, Rania was worried about the one sent by the Master of the Black Tower. The girl thought that even if they were wagering a real battle, what the guy was doing was over the top. The stars in this world are a reflection of truth. They themselves supply wizards with power according to the price they pay. The place of sacral exchange is the divine scales. Understanding of the device of divine scales is necessary for a mage who is going to use them. Consequently, only a small number of mages are able to withstand a certain flow of energy of the scales. However, there is another side of the coin. Those wizards who couldn't make a deal with the stars created a new concept. They built an imitation of the divine scales in their image. But unlike the real ones, these scales require an offering and it is always a sacrifice of the body. That was the technique Belnoa used. He didn't expect an easy victory from the beginning and set himself up to use his power. The guy thought death was natural. He broke a finger on his right hand with his own hands. Then Belnoa broke 3 more with the fingers of the same hand. This was his offering. A dark energy began to build up around his hand. Lark felt some unpleasant feeling hovering around him. The boy became alert. His instincts were screaming that this thing was dangerous, and he needed to run. In front of Lark stood Belnoa, who was completely engulfed in dark energy. Lark felt that he should retreat for a while. The boy was trembling with fear and began to stagger backward. At this point, Lark shivered. He smiled and thought his thoughts of retreat were scary. The guy believed that no matter what the situation was, a fighter had no right to run. Lark used the acceleration technique and rushed towards the danger. Belnoa already thought that his opponent was going to escape. The guy took a fighting stance and was ready to attack. At that moment, Belnoa was being attacked from above by Lark. He flew straight at the young man, his axe glinting in the sun. Lark swung his axe and struck Belnoa with all his might. He had time to react and defend himself with his dark energy. Lark applied more and more force to his axe, trying to chop through Belnoa's protective barrier. The guy was having a hard time doing it. Lark noticed that something had definitely changed in his opponent, but his battle tactics remained the same crazy. Belnoa was surprised that Lark characterized his tactics that way. He didn't understand who the guy was to say what was okay and what wasn't. Belnoa used the power of the present again. He glanced at his left hand, and in a flash, 3 fingers on it broke. Lark did not understand what this ominous feeling was enveloping him from head to toe. At this time, the dark energy of Belnoa was growing stronger and stronger. Belnoa sent his bloody tongue toward Lark. He was not frightened, and ran straight toward the boy. At that second, Rania appeared. She stopped the fight. The boys froze in attack positions. The guys didn't understand what was happening, they couldn't move their bodies. The guys were terrified. Rania explained that aggression should not cross the line as it happened in their case, and she has to stop their fight. The girl used the power of restraint. She asked if the guys were paying attention. Rania swung her hand, used her energy to break Belnoa's dark magic. The guy was shocked that the girl was destroying his shadow. He still couldn't move. Rania looked at Belnoa's bloody hand with its fingers broken. The girl needed to patch up her student. She was going to start with his arm. Rania began to use her magic. Her magic reached Belnoa's hand in a flash. His fingers began to gradually recover. The boy didn't realize what was happening. Belnoa realized that the girl had interfered with his deal with the scales and invalidated it. He did not know that such a thing was even possible. The guy was amazed at the girl's abilities. He wondered who she even was. After a while, the forest was quiet. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, illuminating everything around. Lark, standing in front of his opponent, humbly admitted defeat. The boy clenched his hands into fists. He was convinced that he couldn't escape from his opponent. Lark thought that by breaking his arm, he would make Belnoa's shadow disappear. However, the young man realized that even with the limb completely missing, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. Belnoa said that Lark had got it right. Lark humbly bowed to Belnoa and repeated that he had lost and acknowledged his defeat. However, the young man was concerned about something else. He looked intently in the girl's direction. Lark wondered if every professor was as strong as she was. He couldn't believe she had managed to use a restraint when they were both at the peak of their powers. Lark thought that perhaps she was an unusual observer. The girl stood pensively. She said, "What a pity." Rania didn't understand why 2 people with high skill levels were sent to the same area. Perhaps the academy needed to get rid of one of them. The girl was sure they were both worthy of learning. She was going to promote them both. The boys looked at her in surprise. At that second, a brilliant idea came to the girl. She lit up with happiness. Rania called out to the boys and told them to follow her. They walked for some time through the sunny forest. The guys finally arrived, following the girl. They were very surprised to see the destination. Rania led the boys to the mana source in the center of the forest. The girl stood proudly right in front of it. Rania smiled broadly and asked the guys to stand for a minute. She had something to do. The girl set her own terms. If Belnoa could endure a minute in the spring, she would turn a blind eye to the use of magic. And if Lark lasts a minute, she'll ask Professor Rosal to upgrade him. The girl was sure that Lark's pride would accept no other outcome. The guys knew that if they went near the source, the mana in the blood vessels would get out of control. The girl said it would only happen if they dipped their bodies up to their ears, and they were far enough from the center. However, their blood vessels will be slightly wounded, and their lungs will be filled with blood. There is still a tiny chance of dying, but it's very, very small. The boys were horrified by her words. Rania gave the boys time to think. They didn't know whether to accept the girl's proposal. The boys were scared. Belnoa pushed the fear aside and wondered if he should go to the source. The boy stopped doubting and said resolutely that he would do it. Lark replied that in that case he too would go to the mana source. Guy felt that a warrior of the north should not accept defeat so easily. Nor was Lark going to put up with being outclassed. Belnoa was clearly unhappy with his opponent's determination. The guys walked back to Rania. Their test was about to begin right now. The boys stood right in front of the mana source. Magical drops were jumping out of the spring. The boys cautiously dipped their feet into the water. They both waded into the waters of the spring. The boys were fine so far, they thought. It was pretty easy. Rania started counting the seconds the boys spent in the spring. The girl said the first count. At that moment, something strange began to happen to the boys. Belnoa's breath caught. He couldn't breathe. The boy didn't understand what was happening to him. Rania counted to 3. The boys' mouths began to bleed. They struggled to keep from falling. The girl gave the 4th count and asked the boys to tell her if they realized they couldn't take any more. Rania sat down on a rock not far from the mana source and continued to count down the time. The boys were very ill. They could hardly stand the ordeal. Their blood vessels bursting, their lungs filling with blood. The girl counted to 5. She sat bored on a rock with her feet in the water. Meanwhile, there were 2 more disciples in the vicinity of the mana source in the Hermain forest. They looked very tired and were breathing heavily. The boys didn't realize who they were facing and how they should fight against such power. The students were fighting other yearlings. They didn't think they would be so strong. The boys fought the heiress of the Grey Tower. They thought she was fighting too seriously against them. The guys noticed that this place was somehow strange. There were streams of mana all around. The guys immediately felt bad. They couldn't breathe. One of them guessed that there was a source of mana in that direction. The guys thought it was better to go back. If they went in that direction, they would start spitting blood, because there was no wizard who could be there safely. At this time, Rania calmly kept counting down the time for Belnoa and Lark. She was already on the 46th count. The guys were already at the end of their tether, blood gushing from Belnoa's mouth. The girl counted to 47. Rania nonchalantly said the number 48. Lark could barely stand on his feet from the negative effects of the source mana. The girl stood right in front of the guys. She counted 49. The guys didn't look alive anymore. Their bodies were suffering from this ordeal. Rania looked bored and counted to petty 50. She watched the torment of the boys calmly. At the girl's next count, Lark's consciousness clouded with pain. He began to recall the events of the past, when the guy was alone with the blizzard in the mountains. At that moment, he felt fear and helplessness. The image of his father appeared before the boy's eyes. He fiercely asked if he knew the names of those who could overcome this fear and helplessness. Lark gritted his teeth and thought that such men were called great warriors. His father had taught him that true warriors of the North could overcome all challenges and become stronger. Lark was already at the limit of his abilities. Lark's legs were shaking. He was splashing water all around him. The girl counted to 57. On the next 2 counts, blood began to flow from Lark's eyes. Everything around him went black. The boy lasted 1 minute in the mana source. In his last breath, he reached up. The boy could no longer stand on his feet and fell down unconscious. Rania picked him up. The girl put Lark on her shoulder and thought he resisted the influence of the source well. Rania was ready to credit the task in 30 seconds, for Lark's position was not favorable. The girl carried the boy to dry land. Despite the difficulties, Lark held up well, even took 3 steps forward. Rania threw the boy to the ground. The girl looked at Belnoa and said that Larka had more courage than he did. However, the young man himself was not so simple. He sacrificed people to keep himself afloat. Belnoa used the power of exchange and broke 2 fingers to endure this ordeal. Rania recognized Belnoa's determination. They finished. The girl pulled the boy by the scruff of his neck out of the water. As a result, Belnoa also lost consciousness. Rania threw him to the ground next to Lark. Watching the 2 of them, Rania remembered that once her attempt had also ended in failure. Rania looked around. The mana source was bubbling with energy. A question troubled the girl. She didn't understand what was happening to her now. The girl felt normal around the source. The reason this forest is called Hermain is because of the old tree of the same name, which was given to Aplia by an ancient dragon wizard. There is a mana source under the tree. It actually looks like a big puddle. The girl looked at this tree carefully. Rania slowly lowered her foot into the water of the mana source. When a wizard approaches the source, he is saturated with mana that resonates with the magic in his body, and this confrontation quickly suppresses the life force. The girl immersed herself in the water. She was walking along the spring and looking for something. Rania remembered how she had undergone this ordeal in the past. Back then, her blood vessels had screamed as she was submerged in the water. The girl had found the dead boyfriend's body in the water. At that time, the resonating mana was shrinking Rania's blood vessels, and she was going mad in the throes of hallucinations. It had been about 8 years since then. The girl wondered how long she could last now. She'd attacked the Demon King's territory and let the evil energy flow through her, but she must feel something. The girl continued walking on the water. She suddenly stopped. Rania was confused. The girl had already reached the center of the mana source without feeling anything. Rania was perfectly fine. Rania smiled and thought she should admit something. All the trials in the past with the others as heroes were not in vain, and the girl is now much stronger than she was then. At this time in the academy, Caesar was very angry that no one from the northern region had been tested. The man was furious and thought that at this rate he might be blamed for it. He looked at Rania and Roselle sitting in front of him. Caesar thought the girl had a silly expression on her face and slammed both students. Yet she was looking up at the man. Caesar clutched the paper beneath his hand in fury. He was sure that the defeat would be blamed on him, for he was the eldest. Rosal stroked his graying beard thoughtfully and remarked that Caesar's words about no one getting through weren't quite true. Caesar figured the man would side with Rania just because she was his daughter. The old man was sure the young man had seen the report too. The report stated that Lark Van Grace demonstrates a high level of literacy and excellent fortitude. There was also Belnoa's characterization. When tested, the guy stands out with skills in magic and combat skills. Roselle said confidently that they were both talents who deserved a decent education at their academy. That was why these two were taken to the top disciples at the observer's request. The old man smiled. At that moment, Roselle conjured up the principal's order for their enrollment. The sheet fell on the table. The guys were evaluated objectively according to their skills, and the relationship between the white and black magic towers did not affect anything. The boys were enrolled in the same class. The old man asked if it wasn't thanks to Caesar. The man was puzzled. He gritted his teeth in frustration. Caesar agreed with Rosal. He made a decision to end the meeting. Rania and her teacher left Caesar's office. The girl sighed and wondered how Caesar didn't get tired of living like this. Rosal shrugged and noticed that the girl had done well on her first placement test. He was very proud of her. Rania smiled widely. She was very interested in participating in the placement test. After all, the way of learning about guys' magic reminded her of something. However, the guys mostly fought in hand-to-hand combat. The girl felt that since they had magic, they should use it. The old man noticed that they were battle mages. Rania didn't like their approach, after all. If the boys used magic on the battlefield, they wouldn't suffer so much. Roselle was surprised to hear that. The old man was sure that Rania did not even suspect that she herself was the one thanks to whom battle mages appeared. At this time, the girl kept explaining her position. Roselle told the girl to stop complaining and go to the infirmary to check on her students. Rania said she was on her way there. The girl walked down the long hallway toward the infirmary where the boys lay. Rania thought she had already reached the place where the infirmary should be. From the other end of the corridor, she saw two people approaching her. Rania looked away in surprise, hoping to make out the faces of those walking down the corridor. It was Professor Sally, followed by a man. Sally saw Rania and turned to her. The professor asked how an observer who couldn't do the testing decently dared to show up here. It seemed to Sally that Rania was looking down at her. The professor moved closer to the girl. Even though they were now on the academy grounds, the girl was still a color tower master. She considered this basic courtesy that Rania should extend to her. Sally saw the girl frown at her and act like she owned the place. Sally smiled grimly and thought she should put a couple rules of etiquette into the girl's head. Sally stepped on Rania's foot. She thought the girl was a mage whose name had nothing but falsity behind it. According to her, the girl didn't deserve her post. So Sally waited for Roselle's excuses. She called the girl's teacher a worthless grandfather. At that moment, Rania's face changed. Rania thought Sally was fucked. She looked at the professor tensely. Rania was about to attack the professor unexpectedly, to be more dangerous. Edward watched the girl's conflict. He thought he should stop it before things got ugly. Edward tried to stop Sally, asking her to stop. The professor didn't listen to him. She started using her magic. Sally began to conjure, lightning bolts of white magic appearing around her. Edward was still trying to stop her. Rania thought the professor had lost her mind. Sally had directed a stream of her magic at Rania, who stood as if stumped, unmoving. Sally's white magic had almost reached the girl by now. She glared at her coldly. However, Sally wasn't going to hurt Rania. She knew how to contain her power and stopped her magic at the right moment. At that moment, an explosion went off right above Sally. The ceiling collapsed. Sally was dazed with surprise. The girl looked at the result of Rania's magic with fear. There was a burned hole in the ceiling. Pieces were falling off. Sally thought Edward had intercepted her spell and redirected it. But the man knew who the source of the energy was. Edward couldn't believe that Rania had redirected Sally's magic and increased the power of her strike. Even now, the man didn't notice her activating her stock spell. Rania stood eerily behind Sally's back. Edward coughed. He was trying to smooth over a tense situation. Edward asked what good Sally would get out of acting like this and asked her not to make a fool of herself. The girl was very angry when she heard that. Edward turned to Rania fearfully. He knew she was worried about her student and he suggested that she go. Rania was beyond angry. Her eyes glowed with the light of blue magic. And the two went out the door. They continued to argue, Sally saying that her pride was on the line and rebuking Edward. Rania heard them talking. The girl had brought her students close to the mana source, so she was ready to get hit over the head. However, she was very angry that Sally had gotten even on her shoes. Rania raised her head and looked at the result of her actions. A hole in the ceiling of the academy. The girl thought she'd screwed up. It was a clear, sunny day outside, with sakura trees blooming in the academy courtyard. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. One heard someone's footsteps on the wooden parquet of the academy. A girl was walking down one of the halls in the academy. The guy standing next to her was frightened by her presence. She was one of the strongest students in the academia. One student ran from the girl straight to the mana source. The boys thought it was impossible to look at the girl for too long. All the students were frightened by her presence. The girl was the heiress of the Gray Magic Tower. Her name was Lesty Eleanor. Lesty sat down on one of the rows in the lecture hall. She placed her textbook in front of her. The other students looked at her fearfully. Sitting in the audience, the girl was thinking hard about something. 2 days ago, in the western region of her main forest, Flattery was holding onto a magic stone with 10 familiars around her. She handled all of them perfectly. The students were watching the girl from behind the bushes. One guy told the other to just give up. They could try to go to another region. It seemed to Flattery that there was someone watching her behind her back. The girl closed her eyes and used the split vision technique. At the same instant, a bird from her mana materialized above Flattery. It flew high into the sky. The bird girl watched the surroundings of the forest. It looked like all the nearby participants had given up. Flattery thought it was time to end the use of force in that case. Suddenly, the girl noticed something, looking through the eyes of a bird. She was stunned. Lesty saw Rania Van Trees, the observer of the northern region. Rania was all wet. Lesty didn't understand how this happened. After all, the only source of water in the forest should be a source of mana. Lesty thought it was impossible, since after being in it that long, everyone was guaranteed to die. Lesty knew that even Lord Raniel didn't dare go near the center of the mana source. She thought there was no way a girl could handle such a thing. The girl remembered how as a child she was constantly compared to Lord Raniel. She had been considered an inadequate mage and was held to high standards. Flattery was uncomfortable being in the classroom. She had a depressed look. The girl gritted her teeth. At this moment, the door to the classroom opened. The guys didn't realize who had entered it. After all, there should be basics in mana exchanges now. The students realized that it wasn't Professor Roselle who would be introducing today's lecture. Lesty looked closely at her new professor. She recognized her. "Professor, say hello to the students." The teacher was Rania. She said that she would teach the class today instead of Professor Roselle. The girl introduced herself as his assistant and said she was glad to see the students. After closing, the talk about the new professor began. There were many rumors about the girl in the academy. Belnoa also attended the lecture. Princess Ayla was also sitting in the lecture room. She was happy to see Rania. The students knew that the girl had been arranged through connections. The boys thought that Professor Roselle never needed an assistant, so there was a lot of nepotism in the academy. Lark looked at the teacher carefully. Rania heard all the conversations of the boys in the classroom. She stood waiting for the lesson to begin. Earlier, Roselle had asked her to give her a lesson since he needed to go to a magic tower meeting. The girl doubted it was a good idea. Flattery was shocked to see who would be introducing today's lesson. There was no face on the girl. Rania handed out the task sheets to the boys. She put them on the desks. The girl explained that today the kids had to complete a worksheet assignment. They could feel free to ask questions. At the same second, someone in the audience raised their hand. This student had a question. Rania was surprised, for they had just started, and there should be no questions yet. The girl allowed the student to ask. Lesty raised her hand. She asked for guidance on how to solve the 30th assignment. The guys started to talk to each other. The 30th question was about the theory of the divine clock, and only Professor Roselle could answer it. Apparently, the girl decided to play a joke on the teacher. The guys had fun. Rania picked up the assignment sheet and began reading the 30th assignment thoughtfully. The boys thought she was very skillful at pretending to be thinking. They laughed at the professor. One of the students said that Roselle's class knowledge level might be too high for the girl. Roselle warned the girl about that, though. She wouldn't necessarily be on the same page with the students, and it wasn't worth trying to explain what you just had to do, and you'd understand as you walked. It was hard for the girl to understand this because she always acts to learn. Roselle angrily stated that these students were not like her. The old man smiled and added that the girl might not hold back, for the sake of preserving his reputation. Rania realized that the professor had anticipated this situation with the 30th question. The professor, of course, told her not to restrain herself, but the girl thought she shouldn't cause more chaos. Rania decided to take her time and start studying. At that moment, Lesty declared that the girl did not know the answer to this question. Lesty added that she had inflated expectations for Deputy Professor Roselle. The students were surprised at such an insolent attitude of the girl. Flattery advised Rania to work harder. Despite the fact that she'd gotten in by connection, the girl should have learned at least the basics. Lesty thought it was too early for Rania to become an assistant. Rania said that if the girl needed the divine scales so much, she could materialize them easily. There were many people gathered in the building of Aplia Academy. They were mostly teachers. All the men gathered outside the principal's office. They were discussing something. The teachers were indignant. They didn't like the fact that they were kept waiting for a very long time, and a gray-haired old man looked at them from the side. The elder thought to himself, he could not understand why so many people had gathered here. Teachers discussed Rania's actions, someone even said she couldn't have done it. One of the men was talking and recounting some incident to the chairman behind the counter. Conversation participants discussed that docent Rania was able to materialize divine scales. One man didn't believe it. He thought Rania couldn't have done such a thing. The instructor said the docent couldn't have summoned the scales that easily. Someone reported that they each have the ability to exchange with the stars. To materialize divine scales, one must understand every process of exchange perfectly, and a mere docent should not be able to do so. The instructors said that the students saw everything with their own eyes while solving the problem and wanted to check it out for themselves. The elder was very much upset. He was angry at what Rania had done. As he was leaving, the elder heard that the teachers were outraged that Rania had been allowed to teach the class at all. Teachers complained to the chairman that the docent made a big fuss and agitated the students. The chairman thought to himself that Roselle's curse had turned things upside down. In the end, he decided to take matters into his own hands. The chairman tapped his hand on the table and called for everyone to shut up immediately. Then the chairman said, "If anyone doubts the skills of the docent, he can go and see her for himself." The chairman said that he would get Rania Van Trias to give an open class. In their free time, the students walked around the academy building there, as well as the heiress of the magic tower, Flattery Eleanor. Suddenly, the girl dropped her papers with the blueprints for her studies. Lesty turned around and noticed her papers scattered all over the hallway. The girl looked at the papers lying there, wondering if she should pick them up. Flattery was very deep in her thoughts with students looking at her from the side. A magical fairy appeared and promised her mistress that she would raise everything. After the fairy's spell, all the papers started to fly up and up from the floor. The magical fairy continued to manipulate her hands. Lesty noticed that with just a small clap, the fairy made the papers fly up and back into her hands. The girl pondered. She kept remembering how Rania was able to perform the spell with a simpler movement of her hands. Flattery kept thinking that the docent could easily materialize divine scales. The girl decided to herself that Rania was definitely using some kind of trick. A student came up and picked up a sheet of paper. The guy holding the sheet in his hands told Flattery that he didn't need to go that far. The student said that Rania would now teach an open class. He asked why the girl was so unhappy. Flattery snatched the sheet from the boy's hands and told him not to talk as if he knew more than anyone else. One student standing near the wall told the girl not to put her emotions on display. The guy gave Flattery a stern look and said that anyone would be able to spot such hostility. The student added that such a thing would not have happened if Lesty had been up north during the test. Another guy added that he shouldn't have been forced to hold an open class. The student said angrily that even a barbarian is killed by good thoughts. The guy told Flattery's girlfriend to ignore his friend. The student shouted angrily back at his friend that he was now talking about him. Lesty stood pensive and motionless. The fairy was still beside her. The girl yelled at the guys to shut up but added that they couldn't know anything. Flattery turned around and started to leave. She said that Gray's representatives honored the absolute standard of his shadow. The girl reflected that Rania must be racking her brain very hard right now to prepare for the open class. Flattery figured that if everyone and the tower students showed up for class, the docent's luck and tricks wouldn't work anymore. Evening came and it began to get dark. The docent had plans for this time. Rania met in a cozy cafe with one of her student acquaintances. Rania told her student that she had stayed late and praised her for her work. The waitress came over and set Rania's coffee down. She called her professor. The docent was a little embarrassed, but thanked the waitress. The girl looked at the table. She was surprised to be called a professor. Rania wondered if for a professor, holding open classes could be a chore. The docent looked at her interlocutor and asked her if she was okay. The red-haired student told Rania she was doing very well there. The docent asked cheerfully, wondering if she was thinking too loudly. The student answered with a smile that she heard quite clearly. Rania thought to herself that the student had invited her for a cup of coffee after her first class. The docent was on full joyous positivity, thinking she hadn't screwed up. The student told the docent that since that distribution test she has stuck to her own style. The student then advised the instructor that she should always act this way, even if she gets knocked down. Rania looked at her interlocutor with great attention and surprise. The docent then stood up and thanked the student, calling her a princess. Rania, standing, told the student that it went very well. The docent told the student that she was feeling better, and he would be back now to prepare for the open class. The red-haired student liked Rania's words. She smiled back at her and said she couldn't wait. A couple days later, on the day of class, students were looking at the announcements, communicated to all students about an open class on the topic of mana exchange. Students and faculty stood near the announcement and scrutinized it. One teacher said that nothing like this had ever been done at the academy before, and someone was surprised that the principal had authorized it. The students stood around and talked amongst themselves about the upcoming open class. Someone said the class would be taught by an assistant professor. Another student couldn't believe the professors would keep quiet. The student with white hair said she first imagined a rotten odor, but it's really there. The instructor with the beard angrily replied to the student that it was her natural flavor. The student and the instructor started angrily arguing. The instructor was surprised that the student came to the open class after the previous fight. She replied that she was just doing the tower master's job. One student told a friend sadly that he too had been dragged into this. The guy replied that he was. The faculty and students waited for class to begin as lights lit up around the academy. The student said with great excitement to his friend that it was about to start. Associate Professor Rania appeared in the building. Everyone around looked only at her. The bearded instructor and the white-haired student looked at Rania in silence. The docent walked confidently down the hallway. She carried her study materials in her hands. Rania then walked into the auditorium. The students were talking and looking at her. The docent got ready to write the materials on the board. She picked up the chalk. The docent standing in the center of the classroom displayed the text on the blackboard with everyone watching intently. The students were sitting behind the chairs and watching Rania very closely. The docent said she's coming today for an open class on the basics of magic exchange. The girl then introduced herself to the students, giving her name as Rania Vantrias. The girl said that she lacks knowledge in some things, but she asks that students focus and listen carefully. The students were sarcastic that the docent decided to start the class. One of the faculty members was surprised that a mere docent wanted to teach an open class. One of the students told those around her that the principal was behind Rania. The student added that as real mages they would look at the docent's working methods. Students and guests in the audience waited for Rania to begin her performance. The docent decided to wait a while. She closed her eyes and fell silent. After that, the girl opened her eyes and prepared to talk and listen to questions. Rania asked the students to name the 3 steps needed to activate the spell. One of the teachers was surprised. The teacher said that the docent covers the basics that even 5-year-olds know. The student reflected that it made absolutely no difference whether Rania was strong or not. The student thought that everyone gathered in the auditorium had centuries of experience in magic and teaching. For that reason, some girl Rania can't keep up with them as it is. At this time, the docent banged her hands and the audience wondered if she thought there would be any consequences after such a meaningless gesture. The audience looked at the docent and were very much surprised they could not believe their eyes. The instructors now understood exactly what the students had previously told them. The student with white hair was very surprised someone next to her was outraged because he couldn't see anything. People saw how Rania was able to summon the divine scales. Someone said that such a supreme spell was used to make deals with the stars. The students watched mesmerized, and they couldn't believe the docent was able to summon the scales. Rania addressed the audience and said that she wanted to demonstrate the first step in activating the spell. The girl said she would create chains. She began to draw signs in the air with her finger. The signs displayed by the docent began to swirl in the air around her. Above the girl and above the scales, golden magical signs and symbols glittered. Rania launched her signs towards the scales, and now the letters were flying around them. The teachers were very much surprised and amazed. For them, it was all exquisite. The teachers couldn't believe that such a delicate chain could be so perfect. The docent then began to continue the spell and said it was time for the fee. The girl explained to the students that they should pay with mana. A bluish cloud flew up above her hands. Rania very carefully redirected the mana on the scale so that it was not too much but not too little either. The docent was very careful to make sure there was the right amount. The girl glanced over and noticed that the right amount had been used to keep the scales perfectly balanced. The girl said they were coming to an important part of the spell. Golden symbols were flying around her. The docent explained that you have to specify the direction of the spell. After that, there was a sudden ignition. The fire consumed the signs. Rania looked with great attention at the audience. She wanted to explain what it was. The flames still raged above the docent that it was 3 steps that would activate the spell. All the students sat mesmerized and amazed. There was silence all around. Studentka Lesti also sat silently surprised. She couldn't believe that the protagonist had succeeded. The white-haired student thought excitedly to herself that her eyes were not deceiving her. The student realized that the spell clearly had star mana in it. It meant that Rania could manipulate the limits at will. If a person uses the same spell many times, the starlight begins to dawn on a new location. In such a phenomenon, the concept of the name spell is taken to a new level. Advanced and experienced magicians call such a phenomenon a limit. The docent told everyone that she was done, and the red-haired student was glad that Rania didn't disappoint her. The student thought to herself that everyone present already knew the steps of the spell the docent was talking about. Rania told the audience that they are all treading the path of magic. She asked the audience why the path is called that. The docent added that this is indeed the way to go, and she was listened to very carefully by a student with white hair. The student's eyes reflected the fire that burned over Rania. The docent at that time said that everyone was following the path and perfecting it. Rania said that they all read books wanting to get better from it. Also, the docent said that they all spend a large amount of time proving their skills. The teacher with the beard looked at Rania with great excitement and listened to her. Rania said that she had nothing more to explain. The teacher at this time remembered how he had read many books. The red-haired student listened intently to what the docent was saying. Rania said that when they delve into the unknown, they should not forget the basics and neglect the origins of the student remembered how she was a little girl. The docent was finishing her lecture with the magical golden scales still hovering above her. Rania told everyone present that her words are a pillar of support for them. The teacher with the beard was silent. He pondered and realized what he had seen. The students sat in silence too. They didn't expect the open class to end like this. The white-haired student recalled Rania's words about going back to her own senses and mastering the basics. The student thought to herself that such a thing was not even in the textbooks. The white-haired student decided it was all third-rate, and she jumped up from her seat. The guy next to him was very frightened. He excitedly turned to the girl, calling her master. The student with white hair stared in front of her for a long time. She was thinking about something. To the surprise of everyone around her, the girl suddenly started flapping her arms. The guy sitting next to him was very much surprised. He called out to the girl once more. After that, the guy made up his mind and stood up too. He wanted to support the girl. The student was standing next to the girl, and he too started clapping his hands. Then a student with golden hair jumped up from her seat and started clapping. The Lesty student was silently looking at everything that was going on. She didn't show any emotion whatsoever. The docent looked at the audience and saw that everyone present was clapping for her. Rania was very pleasantly surprised. She stood looking at the audience. After that, the docent let out a joyful exclamation. She realized that the lesson had been a success. Rania told all the students that these are the basics of mana exchange. She added that she was ending the class. After the lecture, everyone in the academy was hotly discussing Rania's performance. The female students spoke joyfully amongst themselves that the docent was beautiful. At this time, the girl was walking beside her and the master was walking with her. The people around them remembered that the divine scales were perfect. The students were talking about Rania's performance. The open class has even become a rumor. The students were also surprised and amazed by Rania's performance. They discussed it among themselves. The docent walked beside the master. She felt around as all eyes were directed at her. The protagonist recalled that he had done a lot of things that caused him to be summoned to the principal's office. The headmaster told the protagonist that he was willing to leave the academy to him, and that he was a future mage. Rania told the master who was walking beside her that he looked happy. The docent watched her teacher's reaction carefully. He was pleased. The master looked at Rania with surprise. He liked the girl's compliment. The student with white hair said that she wanted to welcome Rania to her domain. She offered to agree to her offer right now. A teacher with a beard told the docent to agree to his proposal. The girl was embarrassed and did not know what to say. The master asked Rania if she wanted to go straight to the Gray Magic Tower. The girl answered that she would do without. Master said that the elders of the Gray Magic Tower wouldn't mind meeting the docent. Rania decided to write a letter to her father. His castle was in the snowy mountains. Dad sat at the table and carefully read the message from the docent. The girl asks her father in the message how he is feeling now. For a month now, Rania has been at Amplia Academy for her studies. Every day a girl realizes how much she still has to learn. The girl remembered the huge and complicated assignments to be done in class. Any academic assignment seemed very difficult for a girl. Rania remembered the very complicated signs one must make to activate a spell. The docent felt to herself that she didn't understand anything at all. The student felt very clearly that he understood nothing at all about learning. Having said that, there is a fact for the student that helps him a lot. The guy's not alone. He's got a lot of other students who have trouble learning. The student informed her father that the path of learning magic is very long and thorny. Rania, tired of studying, the girl tossed another old book away from her. The docent felt sick. She looked around and saw that her surroundings were dirty. The girl looked around. Everything was cluttered with books. The protagonist thought to himself that he was so busy that he didn't have time to clean. The protagonist remembered that he didn't really take time for himself. Ranel told himself that he had left the front lines and had no reason left to meet those guys. The protagonist thought that the habit of wallowing in himself due to tension was coming to naught. Ranel felt that teaching for him was not as awful as he had previously thought. No one resents it, which means the lessons are going well. The main character decided to take a rest. At that time, a female student knocked on the door and asked if she could come in. Ranel was very much annoyed, not understanding why the student had come now. The door opened. Ranel wondered who had come to see him now. The docent looked at the entering student and asked her what was wrong. Rania noticed a familiar student named Lesty walk in. The docent cheerfully asked the student what questions she might have. The main character could not remember the name of the student who came to him. Flattery looked at the docent and said excitedly that she had something to tell her. The student Lesty pondered. She felt that she absolutely had to get over herself now. The girl realized that she needed to apologize to the docent for her actions. Lesty decided that she needed to tell Rania what the learning process had become for her. For the student, the joy of learning has returned thanks to the knowledge from Rania. Flattery wanted to thank the teacher, but she didn't have time to say she wanted to. Suddenly, the door of the room opened and several men entered. They greeted Rania. A group of men entered and turned to Rania and told her they were looking for her. One of the guests bowed to the docent and said he was impressed by her open class. Rania assumed he was one of the elders of the Grey Tower. Another guest said with great care that Rania has new operating principles. The elders gave the docent amicable praise for the spells she demonstrated in class. The protagonist remembered who hadn't seen the elders in 6 years, but nothing had changed. Renel thought to himself that he absolutely did not expect the elders to come here. At this time, one of the elders nudged the nearby student Lesty. The sudden jolt caused the student to drop her books and they fell to the floor. Lesty was very much frightened. She rushed over to pick up the books from the floor. The student told the elders in a frightened voice that she was very, very sorry. One of the elders got angry. He looked sternly at the student. The elder told Flattery that she was completely useless compared to Rania. The docent stood attentively and watched the elder's demeanor. The elder said with a chuckle to Rania to ignore the next tower master. The docent told the guests that she had business to attend to and so they would have to leave. Rania told the elders that this is a place for learning and priority is given to students. The docent wished with a smile, following the elders a safe journey. The men turned around and headed for the exit. They were discussing something amongst themselves. Student Lesty was very amazed. She wanted to ask the docent something. Rania told the student that now they would have to take a detour past the main staircase to avoid crossing paths with the elders again. The docent told the student that she would listen to her next time and said goodbye. Rania abruptly closed the door in front of the student. She was very surprised. Lesty stood still. She couldn't figure out what it all meant. The docent was left in her office all alone. Now no one was in her way. Streams of blood began to drip from the girl's face and spread across the floor. The protagonist was pleased to think that he'd already forgotten what it even felt like. Renel felt it coming again. He could hardly contain himself. There was a big battle in the mountains. The commander shouted to his subordinates to hold the line at the cost of their lives. There were so many dead people lying around. Bodies were scattered everywhere. The commander shouted menacingly to all his soldiers not to equal. Someone asked how much longer this battle would continue. The soldiers were very seriously exhausted. They expected further battle. The warrior wondered if there was any chance of surviving in such a demonic place. He felt like resting. Suddenly, the soldier saw a bright light. He didn't immediately realize what it was. A golden light illuminated the entire area as if something had flown across the sky. The soldier saw something burning golden fall right in front of him. The warrior shouted to himself in surprise that he had seen an arrow from Lady Lamia. The arrow stabbed into the ground after flying, emitting a golden glow. The warrior was surprised. He noticed a golden-haired archer standing at the top of the hill. Lamia thought, annoyed to herself, that she was only wasting arrows. Lamia prepared to shoot further. She shouted that the powers of the divine archer were with them. The arrow launched by the girl flew towards the target. It was glowing with a bright light. The commander shouted to the soldiers to go forward without fear. The soldiers could not believe that they could win. Suddenly, the sitting soldier saw some bright light in the distance. The warrior took a closer look and a greenish glow spread around. The soldier saw a woman on the hill. He realized it was Saint Sarah. Saint Sarah stood with her eyes closed and surrounded by a magical glow. Sarah opened her green eyes. The warrior noticed that someone else was standing next to her. The warrior noticed that Lord Kyle had appeared and he was armed with a large sword. The soldier was glad that the hero Kyle had arrived here with his squad. Charles entered the battle and began to crush his enemies. The soldiers realized they had won. After a long battle, the enemies did surrender and raised the white flag. Lord Kyle clicked off the soldiers to deliver the news of their victory. The warriors were glad that they had defeated the enemies. They all shouted praise to Kyle. Suddenly, Lord Kyle was distracted from his memories by a voice from the side. The girl put her arm around Kyle's shoulders and asked with interest if he could hear her. The warrior said that his clothes stink and cannot get rid of this smell. Girl suggested to go shopping in search of new things. Sarah turned and told Kyle that she had worn that image twice already. Here came the archer, Linnea. Line said the battle could have ended much sooner if the dying mage had been with them. The girl slyly replied that no doubt there was a use for him as well. Then the girl said thoughtfully that the mage was now on the verge of life and death. The girl said that without her help, the magician would not be able to deal with the curse. The protagonist was walking late at night by himself down the street. He was completely alone. Here Renel thought to himself how he still managed to endure. Suddenly, the protagonist was horrified to feel that the same thing had happened again. A curse fell on Renel again. He felt his heart sink. The hero clutched his hand to his heart. He could barely contain himself. He felt sick. A curse in the form of ashes fell on the heart of the head hero. Renel looked at his hand. There were traces of blood on it. The guy thought he'd managed up to this point. The protagonist thought that's not how serious problems are solved. The protagonist thought and didn't understand why he had to go through something like this. Renel was able to buy some time when he agreed to trade half his life for the king's bound feet. That said, the protagonist's heart was cursed in that it was his fault. Renel walked through the evening city and looked around for the house he wanted. Eventually, the protagonist saw the sign and realized he had found what he needed. The protagonist noticed that the house was very humble and murdered. He decided to go in. Inside the house sat an elder. He heard someone come to the door. The front door creaked open, and right after that, the main character walked into the house. The elder said he couldn't imagine who would show up at this hour. Then the old man told Renel that he had picked up a strange habit since their last meeting. The elder turned to the protagonist, who stood silently by and looked at him. Renel told the annoyed old man that he had come unwillingly. The main character called an old man named Cardi and said he was too mean to a friend he hadn't seen in a long time. Cardi told Raniel that his physical shell had changed, but his soul remained the same. The old man pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that he had a curse on his heart. Cardi asked Raniel what had happened to him in the past 5 years. The protagonist was thinking. He was completely engrossed in his memories. A couple days later, the protagonist was walking around the city and there were a lot of people around. People were drinking and partying without any measure. Everything around was in complete disorder. Overindulging in alcohol, people milled around. Renel walked into the nearest tavern. The protagonist sat at a table with food drinks and contemplated his fate. Renel was unhappy because of the attitude he had to endure. He himself was a former member of the hero's team. The boy was known as the best mage in the kingdom, heir to the Grey Magic Tower. Renel thought to himself that he had given up a sure and bright future. The protagonist went on a necessary 5-year-long journey. Raniel sat at the table and remembered sadly that the journey had brought us nothing good. The protagonist remembered that there was no way he could have foreseen that he would be kicked off the team. Raniel realized that he was very embarrassed to be dating his mentor. The guy turned and noticed a woman with red hair walking down the street. Raniel immediately remembered that this woman was the succubus queen. The woman was immediately approached by a bunch of young guys. The protagonist could not understand why this woman named Lepe came here. Monotonous pounding sounds echoed through the alleys of the entire street. The woman then went to the door of the house and opened it, and a bunch of guys were standing behind her. Lepe cheerfully and happily turned around and told them to follow her. The surrounding people would be as if under sorcery and in a daze. The woman looked at the people and told them to stay calm and come in order. Then Lepe turned around once more and looked at the crowd behind her. Then the woman went to the doors to close them. She decided she would have her fill tonight. Suddenly, footsteps were heard from behind. It was the main character. Renel came up behind the crowd and stood silently watching everything that was going on. A special magic spell began to activate in the guy's hands. Renel decided to fight the Lepe woman, and to do so, he began to have an increase in power in his hand. The protagonist prepared to attack. He was getting closer and closer to the succubus queen. The woman was startled. She didn't expect to see the main character here. The protagonist pounced on the woman and wanted to grab her by the throat with his hands. People standing outside the house did not understand what was happening. They heard the sounds of fighting. Suddenly, the crowd began to shift. Little by little, the sorcery began to come off of them. The succubus queen yelled at the protagonist to stop. The succubus queen was startled to ask the protagonist who he was. At this time, Raniel improved his spells to increase his power. The woman activated anti-magic to protect herself from the protagonist. The protagonist activated his anti-shield to further attack. The woman realized that her opponent had blocked her polymorph abilities and was able to break her mana shield. The succubus queen lay on the floor. She couldn't figure out who was standing in front of her. The protagonist decided to finish off his rival with a new spell. Lepe felt weak and limited in her sorcery abilities. The protagonist decided to finish off the succubus queen with green flames. Raniel launched a spell of great ignition at the woman. The spell threw the female succubus aside. She fell to the ground. Lepe lay on the floor and could not get up. She coughed with difficulty. Then the protagonist took a chair standing nearby and turned to the woman. Raniel told the woman that she doesn't change and asked if she remembered him. Lepe concentrated hard and looked at the guy. She remembered him. The woman yelled to the protagonist that he was a virgin mage from the hero's squad. Lepe even remembered the name of the main character. Raniel said that he would not use force because Lepe quickly remembered him. Lepe told the guy that he can't help but beat up the fragile girl. Raniel answered her that he wanted to destroy the demon succubus that sucks the life out of ordinary citizens. Then the woman suggested the guy to close his eyes. The protagonist looked angrily at Lepe and said that he couldn't close his eyes. The woman said only holy magic works against her. She wondered how the guy wanted to kill her since there were no saints around. The woman wondered if the guy had thought of another way to kill her. Raniel said that Lepe was a persuasive man. The woman wanted to tell him that any attempt would be futile. The protagonist looked at the succubus queen and told her to try to take a hit full of mana. Lepe was really scared. She realized that the protagonist really wanted to kill. The woman was frightened and realized that she had to get out of here. At this time, the wall of the building shattered from a very strong external impact. A huge demon with a sword was coming into the building. He asked Lepe if she was all right. The woman was pleased and called the demon by the name of Dyke. The protagonist realized it was the Black Knight from the Demon King's army. Dyke informed the woman that he was following a signal for help. Raniel realized there was a lot of energy in the demon. The protagonist was surprised that a high-ranking Black Knight came to save Lepe. Demon with a sword rushed to attack the protagonist guy prepared to defend himself. The protagonist activated a double spell for reliable defense. After that, Raniel retaliated with a strong and powerful blue wave strike. The protagonist's magical strike stopped a dangerous attack by the demon Dyke. A powerful spell from the protagonist threw the demon far back. The huge and vicious demon ended up lying motionless on the floor. The woman noticed that Raniel was able to defeat Commander Dyke in the blink of an eye. She could understand how the boy had such a level of close combat. Lepe looked sideways at the main character and had no way of knowing who he was. The woman was afraid that at this rate she might actually die. Suddenly, a life-saving idea came to Lepe. She remembered something important. Lepe remembered the spell called Marble that had saved her. The woman remembered how she had once been told by a black magician to focus on the fact that she must fill the enemy with the life energy she was absorbing. Lepe remembered to herself that she had been collecting other people's energy called mana for years. The woman realized that if she used this energy, she could stop the protagonist, or at least get time to escape. Lepe jumped up and prepared to activate the energy. A reddish dark cloud appeared in front of her. After that, the woman noticed the cloud-like spell begin to move out of her control. Lepe was already struggling to contain her spell. Blue waves began to emanate from her. The main character was surprised and scared. He couldn't understand what the succubus queen was doing. The boy noticed an ominous black mist begin to emanate from the woman. After that, the guy felt something happen to his heart. The protagonist collapsed to the ground. He could no longer stand. He was mowed down by a spell from a woman. Blood started dripping from the guy's mouth and he couldn't fight it. The protagonist continued to cough. Bloody droplets poured out of him onto the floor. The guy realized that he was definitely covered by a spell called Black Fog. Raniel remembered a monster he'd met a couple years ago at the Blackfield. It had a cluster of curses. It was a demon king. The boy will never forget the creature that cursed his heart. The protagonist could not understand why the fog could be here. Most of all, Raniel couldn't understand where the mist could have come from for a succubus. The protagonist stood and saw a curse from Lepe being directed at him in front of him. Raniel realized without a doubt that it was the black mist that had been sent at him. The boy remembered once again the demon king and the cluster of curses that had defeated their team. Raniel had no way of knowing what kind of woman was in front of him. The protagonist was definitely able to fully feel all three spells. The guy felt a physical change of mind pollution and something else unknown to him. The protagonist folded his palms when activating the spell. He realized he couldn't lose again. Raniel felt that in such a situation he must use all available methods. The protagonist decided confidently to himself that he must dispel this fog. The Lepe woman prepared to further attack the protagonist with her spells. The protagonist decided to activate the magical blue lightning bolts right away. He decided that he would use the spell. Raniel decided to take revenge on the Lepe woman with a curse for a curse. The guy was definitely determined to show the queen that 3 years hadn't gone to waste. The protagonist about to launch blue lightning bolts against the woman Lepe. The boy tried, but there was no way he could break through the succubus woman's defenses. The succubus queen had a very large supply of magic mana. After one more magical attack, there was a huge explosion, and all the people were scattered to the sides. The explosion caused the door to fly out of the publication, and then there was silence. The main character stayed inside the building, and the female succubus disappeared somewhere. Raniel sat on the floor. He didn't yet realize the physical changes that had happened to him. The protagonist reflected that he no longer felt the presence of the spell. Raniel immediately sensed clearly that all spell clusters had run out. The protagonist was suspiciously easy to defeat. The Black Mist. During the last encounter with the Demon King, he sacrificed half of his allotted life years. Suddenly, Raniel felt that some important change had happened to him. The protagonist felt that his chest got bigger, and his hair got longer. Raniel looked at his hand and noticed it was white and very thin. Then the protagonist guessed that the whole thing looked like a woman's body. Raniel was both angry and scared. At the same time, he realized that Lepe had done all this to him. The protagonist realized he was in a lot of trouble. He thought that the Demon King's army might still be around. He had to come up with a plan of action. Raniel realized that he needed to recover his spells first. The protagonist made magical efforts and activated the divine scales. A magical scale appeared floating in the air in front of the protagonist. They asked that Raniel voice his wish for them now. The protagonist asked that he wanted everything that was consumed by the curse to come back. The magical scales answered that the protagonist should offer some sort of compensation. After a little thought, Raniel replied excitedly that he could offer 90% of his mana in return. The magic scales responded that it would not be enough and restrictions would be imposed. Raniel didn't like this kind of correlation but had to agree. Libra replied to the protagonist that the deal was completely done. After that, the process of restoring magic to Raniel's body began. Blue magic lightning began to return to the hands of the protagonist. Raniel felt his magical abilities return to him in his hands. Magic spells and acceleration have returned to the protagonist. Then Raniel decided to destroy the magic dome that was next to him. He touched it with his finger. The protagonist noticed as the dome began to crack and shatter. Immediately, a vast purple mist began to emanate around the building. The people on the street were very much surprised. They looked toward the building. People were surprised by the foul odor from the building. They thought it might be demonic energy. Soldiers ran up to the building and told everyone to move to a safe distance. Raniel stealthily stepped aside in the meantime. The protagonist was walking quietly down the street and people around him were talking, not understanding what had happened. Some of the warriors shouted that a barrier had been put on the building that said perception. The main character was walking quietly down the street thinking about what happened to him. Renel was certain that the barrier originated from the skull of the king of the four heavens. The protagonist remembered the succubus queen. He looked to his hand where he held a balloon that mimicked the presence of the demon king. After that, the protagonist made a decision that he couldn't just leave things alone. Renel stopped and thought deeply. Something else struck him hard. The protagonist looked at his hands and realized that the strangest thing had happened to him. The boy wondered very much why his sex had been changed. If someone wanted to kill him, they could have destroyed him on the spot. The main character stopped and wondered he couldn't find the answers to his question. Renel realized there was no point in worrying since he wouldn't be able to get answers. He would have to adapt to life with the curse. It was late in the evening and the main character was sitting at his friend Cardi's house. Renel said that when he went back to the master, he thought he was dying. The protagonist said with a smile that he was very surprised and scared since the master started screaming so suddenly. Carrie stopped Renel's story. The elder was at this time preparing magic potions for the protagonist. Cardi interjected with interest at the boy's unlikely attack on the black fog. The elder turned to his interlocutor for not talking nonsense. Renel told Cardi to look at the way he looked now. The elder said that from the story he realized that the protagonist had had a great last 5 years. After that, Cardi snapped his fingers and the process of magical change began. The old man turned into a young guy and told the protagonist that he was surprised that he tried to suppress the curse and turned it into mana. Cardi said he didn't know exactly how to fix the physical changes. At the same time, a vat of purple elixir was boiling. Cardi said he could stop the curse's destructive energy too. After that, the wizard began pouring the elixir into various vessels. Soon enough, a whole set of vessels with elixir inside them appeared on the table in front of Cardi. Renel took one of the vessels and asked if he really needed to drink it now. Cardi said the elixir wouldn't be a permanent solution. That said, the protagonist will be able to last without the saint's treatment. Renel replied that he was incredibly grateful. The protagonist excitedly and sternly asked Cardi if he knew anything about the curse. After a short pause, the young wizard replied that he couldn't tell. The protagonist shouted angrily that Cardi was always making a big deal out of himself. The wizard calmly replied that Renel should drink 1 bottle a month. The protagonist then replied that he didn't want to take for free, and asked what he could do for Cardi. The young wizard calmly replied that he didn't need any payment. The young wizard thought for a moment. He said that he wanted to ask his interlocutor something. Cardi said warily that he could feel something crawling through the underground gutters. The young wizard told Renel that he had sent an apprentice there before. The protagonist was very surprised. He asked if Cardi had an apprentice. Renel asked what the young apprentice's name was and what he did for a living. Cardi replied that he was more of a parent to the student than a mentor. It was the most important task for him to teach this child magic. Already at the end, Cardi told the protagonist that his apprentice's name was Belnoa. The hunter named Belnoa continued to be in the gloomy dungeon. A huge group of vicious and demonic wolves gathered around the guy. The demonic wolves gradually approached the guy he was preparing to fight them. Then Belnoa remembered that he had promised Chloe that he would meet her tomorrow. The protagonist confidently decided to himself that he needed to end it now. The guy activated magic and was able to strike one demonic wolf to death. Belnoa looked to the side and noticed more wolves running at him. The guy successfully killed another wolf with a magic shot. Belnoa successfully struck the demonic wolves, their bodies lying around. Consistently destroying the wolves, the guy confidently advanced through the dungeon. Belnoa remembered how Rania had forced him into the mana source before. After killing another demonic wolf, the guy remembered that he had gotten bonuses he hadn't expected. Belnoa now uses less mana for more spells. The hunter took a breath and looked around. Then suddenly something caught his attention. Belnoa looked to the side. There was a suspicious noise and a glow in the distance. The hunter turned around and looked back very intently and warily. The guy noticed a figure standing in the tunnel in the distance, and there was a glow around it. Belnoa thought the undead traveled freely through the underground drains. The guy also noticed that someone was walking around here and not even trying to hide their presence. Belnoa struck another wolf with a hard blow. He was still thinking about the sinister figure. Belnoa thought for a moment and realized that the figure was a dangerous enemy to him as well. The hunter realized that the sinister stranger had unleashed all these monsters. Belnoa decided to attack. He aimed a spell called Shadow Needle at the figure. The figure did not react in any way, and the spell stopped beside it. The guy continued to attack the stranger, who was able to defend himself by flying upwards. Belnoa noticed with surprise and annoyance that his opponent had ducked. The guy decided that he had to use every spell he could right now. Belnoa continued to attack with all his might at the unfamiliar enemy, who dodged skillfully. After that, the stranger prepared to attack the hunter with acceleration. The figure rose and flew toward Belnoa, who could not defend himself. Belnoa was very much surprised. He didn't expect his opponent to be so strong. The enemy flew in the direction of the hunter. Guy realized that he was completely powerless. Belnoa saw that his enemy was very close. The stranger was almost there. At the last moment, the stranger stopped in flight and folded his fingers on his hand. The enemy suddenly flicked his finger on the hunter's forehead, and he was surprised. Suddenly, the stranger told the hunter that he was already much better. Then the stranger threw off his hood, and it turned out to be Rania. She instructed the boy not to attack unless he was sure it was an enemy. Noah listened to the girl and suddenly interrupted her. He wanted to ask her something. With great surprise, the guy asked the docent what she was doing here. Rania replied calmly that the boy's mentor had asked him to deal with the outrage going on here. The guy asked the girl again if she was referring to old man Cardi from the potion store. Rania confirmed that she meant Cardi. The girl prepared to activate the spells. After Rania's spells, a blue magic light appeared and it struck all the demonic wolves. The docent asked the guy how old he was. Noah replied that he was 27 years old. The guy and the girl were walking past those demon wolves lying there. Rania asked if the boy had anything else to say. Noah turned to the docent and asked if he could ask her something. The guy asked the girl what she did before she got a job at the academy. Noah noted immediately to himself that Rania is very strong and effective. The boy thought to himself that a docent who spent her life reading couldn't move like that. Rania is more like a trained soldier. After a long pause, the girl replied that she worked in a very dirty place. Then the girl noticed a whole pack of demonic wolves coming at them down the dark corridor. Rania told the guy that enough talking and he should finish warming up. Seeing a pack of vicious wolves, the girl thought to herself that they had come. Rania began the spell by activating first Ash and then Ignition. Immediately, magical waves and vortices began to gather around the girl. Rania sent a blue cloud against a pack of wolves and it successfully hit them all. The guy was very surprised he didn't understand what kind of spell this was. Noah thought to himself that it looked as if the docent was using several spells at once. The guy couldn't even speculate on the principles and mechanisms behind it. The guy said the smell is getting worse, and do they really need to keep going? Rania said they should go on. She opened the big doors in the wall. The docent noticed how inside the room was a small altar, and on it was a magical sigil. The next day, the girl went to the elder Cardi to talk to him. Rania asked the elder who Noah's boyfriend was supposed to meet. Cardi replied that the guy was supposed to be meeting his childhood friend named Chloe. The protagonist was surprised at this answer. He asked the old man why he changed his appearance. Cardi replied that it was easier for him to get closer to people. The protagonist replied that he had to go as there was still a lot to do. Then Ranel showed the elder a small altar he had found in the underground gutters. This thing was releasing a lot of demonic energy. Ranel said it was very suspicious that the altar was in the middle of a canal and guarded by a mob of undead. The protagonist that he is alarmed by the orbs that resemble those of the woman Lepe had. Ranel thought about it and remembered the barrier that distorted perception. That was the reason why no one noticed the altar. Elder Cardi silently listened to the protagonist. He didn't answer him anything. The protagonist thought to himself that the altar was right in the center of the royal capital, and it couldn't be a coincidence. Ranel said very excitedly that it's going to get messy very soon. The protagonist felt that everywhere spreads the smell of a huge and dangerous demon. It's been a whole month since the main character became an assistant professor, and a lot has changed. Ranel is slowly getting used to leading classes at the academy. The protagonist explains in detail the syllabus to the students in the classroom. Students listen carefully and take notes on everything Ranel tells them. The protagonist was telling the students about the kind of constraints that can be sketched. Rania showed the students how to get a complete system, and it takes a lot of mana to realize it. The docent asked who did not understand. The students looked at the teacher in silence. Rania decided that the students were having a hard time. The docent wondered how to help students understand the material. The docent told the audience that she would leave notes on the board. Student Lesty was taking careful notes at the time. The instructor posted some signs on the board and told the students to use the remaining time to figure them out. The docent thought to herself that there was no difficulty today except for her inner fear. Rania told the students to create an author's spell before the next class. She suggested that they should also solve practical problems. The docent then told all the students that class was over. The students came up to the board with the letters and began to write everything down and analyze it in detail. Rania walked out of the classroom into the hallway. She decided that she would not get praise from her mentor. The docent wondered if she needed to show students why she was having difficulty during her oral presentation. The girl remembered that she hears from students that they learned a lot from her classes. Rania stood looking at the conferring students. They were discussing her lecture. The docent noticed a guy discussing what she was saying in lecture. Rania realized that she had missed the principle of the explosive chain to explain it. The protagonist immediately thought that he wouldn't do exactly the same thing. Ranel looked at the conferring students, sensed that there was something he didn't understand. The protagonist thought that if the students were failing, they would ask for help like the student Lesty did. Ranel decided that it was easier for him to kill demons than to teach now. Associate Professor Rania was summoned to her office by one of the faculty members and pointed to a pile of papers on her desk. The woman angrily told Rania that she had complaints about her classes written down on sheets. Then the woman added, that there were a lot of complaints about Rania. The girl was a little scared and embarrassed. The woman reminded the docent that she was only assigned 2 disciplines. She suggested that she read all the complaints. One of the students wrote that the instructor's diagrams are very complicated, and for that reason he cannot understand them. Another student complained that the docent had a very high rate of her speech. For some students, the terminology used by the lecturer was unfamiliar. The woman asked Rania sternly what exactly she was doing in class, and for her to put herself in the student's shoes. After a brief pause, Rania looked at the woman and said she didn't understand anything either. The docent said angrily back to the woman to slow down. The woman smiled crookedly and said that Rania had absolutely no idea how to teach. Then the woman told Rania that she and Kelt were like heaven and earth. The girl asked the woman in surprise who she was talking about. The woman was surprised that Rania didn't know the associate professor named Kelt yet. On the battlefields, Kelt stood shoulder to shoulder with Professor McCart. Kelt has since left the army due to his injuries while still studying magic. The woman said Associate Professor Kelt understands the students' situation and teaches them to go forward. Rania sat and was silent. The woman said that Kelt is a true educator whom everyone loves. The next day, the students gathered to discuss the lectures. The main meeting place for the students was the cafeteria at their academy. Student Lesty walked into the cafe and was greeted and told to sit wherever she wanted. Lesty walked into the cafe and quietly greeted everyone present. One of the students complained that Assistant Professor Rania's lessons were very complicated, and he didn't understand anything. Another student remembered that even Professor Roselle explained everything better. Student Flattery was walking past other students and wondered if the cafeteria was always so crowded. Lesty finally found the nearest empty seat. She decided to sit there. The student hoped the person next to her would be as calm as possible. Lesty noticed a student with white hair sitting next to her. He greeted her. The student looked at the student. His name was Lark, with very great displeasure. Lesty asked Lark with grudging surprise if he was here too. The student replied to a very thoughtful girlfriend that he drinks black water. Lesty wondered what kind of black water Lark could be drinking. She wondered if that was what he called coffee. The student replied that that's what they do. Looking at the textbook, he added that the task would not be easy. Lesty noticed that the guy's face was very stern. She thought there must be a reason to drink what Lark was drinking. The student looked closely at the book and something interested her very much. The boy replied to Flattery that he was looking at the task he had gotten this morning. He hadn't been able to solve it yet. Lark explained that he came to the cafe since some of his classmates often study here. Flattery scrutinized the drawing and drove her hand over it at length. The student looked very carefully at the diagram. She remembered something important. Student Lesty spent a long time studying the materials, spending time behind a pile of books. The girl tried very hard, and it came to the point that tears fell from her eyes onto the book. Lesty was very persistent in continuing her studies even though it brought her to tears. Lesty sat back down and asked the Lark student what he didn't understand. Flattery told the guy to use the same method as question 3. Lesty looked at the student and indicated that she would only tell him once and that he should listen to her. The boy agreed. Lesty said that if Lark asked Assistant Professor Kelt about the basics of this spell, he would explain the theory on which it was based. The girl advised that it would be better to consult a book on the subject. Rania felt again that she had heard the name Kelt unpleasant to her. The docent sensed that the turned expression on the students' faces made him believe that she was failing as a teacher. Rania heard some female students nearby turn to Associate Professor Kelt. Several female students approached Kelt and wanted to ask him something. He asked them what the problem was. Rania looked at the young man. She couldn't believe it was the associate professor. The docent turned and eyed Kelt carefully. She wanted to see how good he was. In the second indoor training area of the academy, the students were practicing to face the monsters. One of the guys fell to the ground in fear. He yelled at the monster to go away. The monster looked at the student with an evil gaze and was very frightened. The guy realized with fear that everything was already over for him in this life. Instructor McCart Clerpit came over and shouted sternly to the student to get up now. After the class, the student told the hapless student that he didn't have the slightest idea of the basics and would have died long ago if he had been on the battlefield. The student didn't understand why they had to fight the demonic world alone. One of the students said it was better when Professor Kelt taught the class. The guy standing in front of the monster didn't understand why he would even breed demonic beasts. The student decided it looked a little odd. Someone clued the student in that the beast was bound by control magic. If the monster was bound by control magic, it had no way to attack. The student was very much frightened. He couldn't believe that the monster couldn't get him. Due to fear, the student screamed loudly so that he could be heard far away. Meanwhile, Rania continued to sit in the cafe. She listened to the conversations that were going on around her. Rania was very much interested in Associate Professor Kelt and wanted to know what he was capable of. One of the students was sitting next to the assistant professor and asked him something. Kelt explained everything to her in detail. The protagonist realized that the student was asking the same thing he taught his students. He didn't understand what the difference was. Rania listened carefully and realized that she hadn't explained some important parts to the students after all. The docent set her coffee cup on the table. She had decided something after all. Rania saw very clearly that the Celt students looked happier. The docent observed that students demonstrate a full understanding of the material and do not stand still. Rania could clearly see the students studying diligently and attentively. The docent glanced after Celt didn't understand what he was doing differently. As they left, the students turned and cheerfully said goodbye to Celt. Instructor Celt waved a cheerful goodbye to the female students. Then Celt greeted the docent Rania. He told her that this was the first time they were meeting face to face. Celt turned to the girl and asked with interest if there was anything he could do to help her. Rania was surprised that the assistant professor knew her. The professor had told her that she was the most discussed topic in the academy. He invited her to sit down. Rania thought for a while, and she couldn't believe she was so popular at the academy. Celt told Rania that she looked very worried. He would love to talk to her. Rania told the teacher that the students understood his explanations perfectly well. She asked what his secret was. Celt stirred his drink and told the girl that he was pleased that she thought so well of him. The instructor said he wouldn't call it a secret. He added that all the students are still children. There are many paths open before students, and they do not know which one to choose. Many doubt the right decision. Celt teaches the students his way. The Celt instructor reminded him that this was exactly how his mentor had taught him as well. Rania pondered. She understood now exactly what the meaning of Celt's success was. The instructor said after Rania's pause that it was a very difficult subject. Here the Celt suddenly remembered something and wanted to tell the docent. The teacher said that he had studied pedagogy, and for that reason he could recommend some books to the girl. Celt suggested that his interlocutor go to his lab today if she wasn't busy. Rania looked worriedly at Celt and said she had a very loose schedule. Celt suggested to Rania that he could show her his lab right now, and they headed for the exit. The teacher and the girl were walking through the territory of the academy. Time was approaching evening. Celt asked after a pause from the girl if he could ask her a personal question. Rania agreed to the question. Celt wanted to ask the docent how she met a professor. Suddenly, the instructor heard someone call out to him very loudly and menacingly. Professor McCart came up and asked the Celt very angrily what he was doing here. Celt greeted the professor in surprise and a little fear. McCart walked toward him with quick steps. Rania thought about it and remembered that she had heard the name Macarta somewhere before. Celt explained that he had just been talking to Associate Professor Rania. McCart accused Celt of doing useless things and of not being careful with control magic. Professor McCart then scattered a pile of documents out of Celt's hands and they went flying around. Professor McCart reported that another demonic beast had snapped in the middle of class. McCart told Celt that if he couldn't do his job, he should go back to the battlefields. The professor added that this was the final warning. He demanded that Celt investigate and send a report tonight. Rania looked at Celt and asked in a frightened voice if he was okay. The instructor smiled and said it was common for him. The instructor, along with the girl, began to gather papers. Celt said that Professor McCart trained students in the process of real battles. For this reason, they breed demonic beasts in the lab. Celt took the papers in his hand and said that work had been going even worse lately. Rania thought that gaining experience was very important, but also important at what cost. The Celt instructor decided to say something about his approach. Rania looked at the Celt and clarified what he was talking about. The teacher thanked the girl for helping him collect the papers. The girl told Celt that it must be hard for him to carry the papers. The teacher replied that he was strong enough. After that, Rania said goodbye to the teacher and said that she would not detain him. At night in the neighborhood of Aplia, Belnoa was practicing on a forested training ground. The guy had honed the professionalism of his skills in battle. Belnoa conducted professional attacks practicing in trees. The hunter hesitated. He felt that something was very much on his mind. Belnoa was still remembering the suspicious altar they had found in the dungeon with Rania. The guy thought that at the altar his aura was unusual. He decided that the docent was unlikely to tell him anything. Suddenly a student came up behind Belnoa and said he didn't expect to see him here. Lars had a huge axe on his shoulder. He asked Belnoa if he was also working in the forest. Lars looked at the damaged trees and told Belnoa that his marksmanship had improved. He asked if he practiced on weekends. Belnoa turned around and wanted to leave. Lars asked him if he was dating a teacher outside the academy. Engrossed in the conversation, the students didn't notice how monsters began to approach them in the darkness. Lars was following Belnoa and offered him a small confrontation. Lars wouldn't leave his interlocutor alone and suggested that he set up a competition. Belnoa looked around and said that there were demonic beasts in Aplia. Lars excitedly said that under normal circumstances this would be impossible. Lars looked at the herd of angry wolves and asked how they would determine the winner if they counted ears. Belnoa answered that the winner would be the one who would kill the most enemies. The demonic wolves continued to approach the students. They were preparing to repel the attack. Belnoa asked the boy if he was ready. Lars replied confidently that he was always ready. Belnoa told the student that they were starting. Lars was holding battle axes.